It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I am your host this morning. In fact, I'm your host every morning. Thanks for spending your time with us. We appreciate it. We're looking for a few good patriots. I'm asking you directly, are you one of them? So far this morning, we talked about Obamacare, we talked about Palin's letter, and why you should be a participant in the restoration of our republic back to some semblance, some level of the ideas upon which our founders built this nation. Because we're so far afield from that. We're not even in the same ballpark anymore, much less, we're not even in the same city, much less in the same ballpark. We're going to talk about immigration now because Obamacare isn't the only betrayal tragedy that is about to befall us. But the immigration bill that is sitting there right now, it was already approved by the Senate, is an absolute treasonous betrayal of everything that America stands for. There are so many special benefits to immigrants in there that you won't believe it when you know what they are. There are so many spending things in there that have absolutely nothing to do with immigration. You won't believe it when I tell you. Harry Reid got a $100 million Benny in there for Vegas casinos. The heck does that have to do with immigration? And why should taxpayers spend $100 million on Vegas casinos? For what? Don't they have enough from our daily, or I shouldn't say daily because I never go there, but don't they get enough from the depositors who visit all the time? The millions upon millions of visitors who go there and make a one-way deposit? When they passed this debacle in the Senate, and it's now ready to go to the House, it was a 1,200-page legislative monster. The senators were given 72 hours to read the final version of the bill. Now, I can tell you right now, 1,200 pages is not readable in 3 days. Unless you have absolutely nothing else to do, you don't eat, you don't sleep, you don't go to the bathroom, or at least you read it while you're in the bathroom. 1,200 pages requires that you cannot take a phone call, especially of legalese. 1,200 pages of legalese would put most of us into a comatose state. They'd find us laying there 72 hours later, quivering and shaking on the floor. Or having already committed suicide because the legalese is so dangerously monstrous, so heinous, that you can't live with the reality of it. They passed the bill with, again, Nancy Pelosi's claim of, well, we got to pass it to see what's in it. None of them read it. Now that there's been a little bit of time that's passed, they're trying to push it through the House. And now plenty of people have had a chance to read it and dissect it and figure out what's wrong with it. And man, oh man, is there everything wrong with it. They're going to give every illegal amnesty. It allows chain migration that allows you to grab not only yourself, but also all of your directly and not so directly connected family members and bring them over. They say there's only 11 million of them. That's a lie, because there was 11 million of them back when Reagan was president. And if you're trying to tell me that they're not breeding, or you're trying to tell me that no new ones have entered, then I got to ask you the obvious question. Can you do basic arithmetic? See, you can't tell me there's only 11 million of them. We don't even know how many there are. They're not all Mexican, by the way. Half of our immigration problem is people who come over here from a foreign country to go to school. They come over here on a visa. They come over here to go on vacation, or at least allegedly to go on vacation, and then they never leave. And we have no way to track them. They're supposed to voluntarily report in. Well, do lawbreakers voluntarily report in? Of course not. They don't. So, therefore, we have no idea who they are, where they are. And even when we find them, we let them go. For the record, if you're not aware of it, this immigration bill was the direct cause of why the ICE, or Immigration Customs Enforcement, just let 40,000 of them loose. They didn't kick them over the border. They kept them here and let them loose into our streets. 40,000 of them. And by the way, out of that 40,000, 2,837 of them were convicted sex offenders who hadn't even been charged with their new sexual crime, and they were released into our communities. Now, I'm going to ask you something. If your son or daughter, if your wife or girlfriend, if your husband or mother is one of those who is now sexually abused by one of those 2,837 who were released into our unsuspecting flock, what do you think that means? That means it was a preventable tragedy. And we as Americans shouldn't be angry. We should be in open revolt. Right now, they're trying to push this monstrous debacle through the House. And I say over and over and over again, and I've said it many, many times, there's only two things that we need to tell our House representatives. And it's very clear what those are. First and foremost, the bill must contain the following provision. No immigration bill until the border is independently, verifiably sealed, and all immigrants have registered. After that, we can have whatever discussion you want. But the first thing that we do is we seal the border. Why do I say that? And I know a lot of people who are socially liberal but conservative fiscally will say, well, that's not fair. They're just people too. I get it. And I'm not disputing the fact that they want to come here. What I am saying is that because this is our country, we have a right to know who they are and what they're doing. If they just knocked on your door, would you open your door and say, sure, you can come on in. I don't know who you are, but, there's food over there in the refrigerator and, you can have the spare bedroom down the hall. Of course not. No immigration bill until the border is independently verifiably sealed and all illegal immigrants have registered. Why? Well, first of all, we need to know who they are and where they are and what they're doing here. After that, we can decide how and when and who's going to get in and how long is it going to have to take them? How do they have to take this test or that test, pay a fine, and all the rest of that nonsense? But for a starter, look, let me explain it to you this way. I come up on you, and you're laying there in the battlefield. And I can see that one of your legs has clearly been blown off by an explosion. And I'm looking down, and I see the blood is squirting out of that blown-in hole. And I can see that your face has got a couple of pretty severe wounds, too. But right now, the first thing I need to do as triage is to put a tourniquet around that leg. Because if I don't, you're gonna die. My first function is to stop the bleeding. Yes, I get it. Those scars on your face are going to make you almost horrific. You may even lose an eye. But if I don't stop the bleeding, it ain't going to matter. So first and foremost, let's stop the bleeding. Our nation is bleeding illegal immigrants. Bleeding them internally. So let's tie a tourniquet around the border and seal off the flow. Once we've accomplished that, we now have a few seconds of breathing room to take a look at what else we need to do to stabilize the patient of the United States of America. We then need to take a look and say, okay, I've stopped the bleeding. Now, let me see where my next priority lies. But you see, the way they want to do it is, well, let's patch up his face first so that he looks good. What that will result in, ladies and gentlemen, is very simple. You're going to be a very handsome cadaver in a coffin. But you will be in a coffin. The simple truth, the simple reality is very easy to understand. If we don't stop the bleeding, the patient will die. The patient is the United States of America. The bleeding right now is immigration. It's also Obamacare. But for the moment, let's just focus on, when you arrive on the scene, you can only do one thing at a time. They say, well, let's not tie a tourniquet off to shut off the bleeding. Let's not try to shut off the bleeding that's coming out of the hand that got blown off. Let's just put him on a stretcher and carry him over. And while we're at it, I'll dab some blood off of his face. And, well, the patient's going to die, so it doesn't really matter. Why bother? Why do all of it at once? You see, they want to do an omnibus bundling. Let me tell you what omnibus means. It means you take a whole bunch of little bills and you stick them all together, and you have this thing called omnibus, right? So what happens is the Senate and the House, go back and forth, and they discuss it and betray us and whatever. Then they vote on it. And they vote on not one bill, but like 100 bills all bundled together. The problem is that none of those bills truly then really get an opportunity to be evaluated, discussed, and understood. So, doesn't it make sense, instead of just trundling the patient onto a stretcher and running off without dealing with any of the emergency, that we first look at the patient and decide what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that we can do immediately and in order, depending upon how dangerous they are to the life of the patient. Well, the first thing that we've got is a very, very dangerous, badly bleeding leg. So let's tourniquet that off. That's the border. After that, we can look at the fact that he's also missing a hand. And so it's probably a good idea, although it doesn't look like that's quite as severe as the leg. So let's tourniquet off the arm. Then and only then do we turn around and look at the face and say, okay, now he's got this really bad cut and it looks like he might lose his eye. But you know what? He could live with one eye. You see, this doesn't take rocket scientists to understand it. This doesn't take someone with a poli-sci degree. This doesn't take a college educator. This is common sense. This is the common sense that our founders gave us in the Constitution. This is the common sense being used that God and nature's God gave you. It says, understand those things that everyone understands. You don't have to have a medical degree to recognize that the blood pumping out of that guy is going to take his life. And you don't need a political science degree to understand that if the borders are not independently verifiably sealed and all the illegal immigrants registered, everything else is a moot point. This bill has to contain this provision, first and foremost. The first bill, not an omnibus bill, but one bill that passes, and it needs to say this: no immigration until the border is independently, verifiably sealed, and all illegal immigrants have registered. Independently verified, because we can't trust the Department of Homeland Security, run by the former monster Janet Napolitano, to actually tell us whether or not the border's truly been sealed. So the border has to be independently and verifiably sealed, and all illegal immigrants have registered. Why? Well, because if we don't know who's here, then how can we have a plan of action? We don't know how many there are. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they came from. So how can we have a plan of action to assimilate them into our society if we don't know who they are and where they came from or what their motivations are for being here? They're not all here for the American way of life. Let's not fool ourselves. Some are here for a far more nefarious or dangerous purpose. Immigration, like what we should have done with Obamacare, should be a step-by-step process. You pass one bill. You allow that to take and work. Take its time and work. Then you look at the results of that and you go to the next step. But this idea of passing massive reforms of dozens or hundreds of bills bundled into one, and then let's just wait and see what happens, is foolish and dangerous. Now, Biden the other day was down in Mexico actually campaigning for illegal immigration. You don't believe that? He actually has the nerve to campaign for immigration in Mexico. He says, we've got to bring 11 million undocumented out of the shadows. Well, first of all, they're not undocumented. They're illegal. And let's call them what they are. Enough of the mamby-pamby PC crap. They're illegal because they are here illegally. And if you are here illegally, you are not undocumented. You are illegal. End of discussion. If you rob a bank, you are a bank robber, not an unauthorized withdrawer. Right? If you've robbed a bank, you're not guilty of an unauthorized withdrawal. You're guilty of bank robbery. So first and foremost, let's call them what they are, illegal immigrants. Then secondly, yes, I agree, they must come out of the shadows. They must come out of the shadows immediately after the borders have been sealed. Now, how do we do that? Well, here's a basic premise. And listen, I'm no political science major, but I think it's a fairly good and reasonable plan, and I think most Americans would agree with it. You give them 6 months to 12 months, whatever we all think is appropriate after we've had an opportunity to tie off the tourniquet on the bleeding artery. And then we say, look, you got 6 months or 12 months to come forward and say, my name is Muhammad, my name is Jose, my name is Franz, my name is Robert, and I am an illegal alien. And I'm registering myself, my wife, my family, or whatever. And the penalty for not registering is immediate ejection. In other words, you got 6 to 12 months to register. If we find that during that period of time, because what we're going to say to you is, now that we know who you are and where you are, and we've sealed the border so that no more can come in, now we're going to deal with the lot of you that are here. But we need to know who you are and where you are and where you came from and you know what you're doing. Are you working? Are you not working? Are you feeding on our resources or are you contributing? And once we know who you are and where you are and all the rest of that, now we can figure out what we're going to do with you. And I'm not suggesting that we just take them up en masse and toss them out of the country. But I am saying this. If you are not willing to step forward and register yourself, then we owe you nothing. And after that 6 or 12 months period has expired, those who have not registered are subject to immediate ejection if found, when found. In other words, we're not telling you that we're going to toss you unless you refuse to participate and register. Then those who have registered, now we can sit down and have an intelligent discussion. Okay. One, there's a couple of things you got to do in order to become an American, and here's what they are. That's it. I'm not against them becoming Americans ultimately. I'm telling you right now, it better be a long and painful and hard road. But those who are unwilling to come forward and register after the borders are sealed, you and I got nothing further to discuss. You are subject to immediate ejection from the country. And if your own country won't take you back, as happened with 2,837 sex offenders who their own country said, we don't want them back. So what we did is we just cut them loose and let them into our society. Really? Yeah, that's what they did. If your own country won't take you back, then I suggest we put you on a plane and we fly you over your country, over to wherever you came from, and we eject you anyway and just push you out onto the tarmac and say, ladies and gentlemen, he's not our problem. And then leave. Now, whatever they do to you back in your home country that they don't want you for, that's on you. But it's not our problem to deal with you. If you are unwilling to step forward and register, we don't want you here. You have no right to be here. First and foremost, the border gets sealed. Then everyone must come forward and register. If you are unwilling to do that, there's no further discussion necessary. That tells me your motives are not pure. That tells me you didn't just come here for some better life. That, ladies and gentlemen, is pure logic. It is great reason. I'm not saying it's perfect. I mean, I get it. There are some people who will resist. Maybe some good ones. But that's really not our problem either, is it? If they're too frightened to come forward, even after we've made it clear that what we're trying to do is provide them with a method where they can stay, then, listen, we don't owe them any further obligation. It's that simple. Oh, I know they came here with the right intentions. Some of them. But we have the right intention too, which is to preserve and defend our nation and our sovereign border. And until that is accomplished, we don't really have much of anything to discuss with Washington either. No immigration bill until the border is independently, verifiably sealed and all illegal immigrants have registered. Then every bill dealing with immigration goes through standalone on its own merits, one at a time, until we've solved the problem. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Find us at americasvoicenow.org and at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. There and at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. We'll be right back.